Ashoka Maurya, commonly known as Ashoka and Ashoka the Great, was an Indian emperor of the Maurya dynasty who ruled almost all of the Indian subcontinent from c. 268 to 232 BCE. One of India's greatest emperors, Ashoka reigned over a realm that stretched from the Hindu Kush mountains in Afghanistan to the modern state of Bangladesh in the east. It covered the entire Indian subcontinent except parts of present-day Tamil Nadu and Kerala. The empire's capital was Pataliputra, with provincial capitals at Taxila and Ujjain. In about 260 BCE, Ashoka waged a bitterly destructive war against the state of Kalinga. He conquered Kalinga, which none of his ancestors had done. He embraced Buddhism after witnessing the mass deaths of the Kalinga War, which he himself had waged out of a desire for conquest. Ashoka reflected on the war in Kalinga, which reportedly had resulted in more than 100,000 deaths and 150,000 deportations. Ashoka converted gradually to Buddhism beginning about 263 BCE. He was later dedicated to the propagation of Buddhism across Asia, and established monuments marking several significant sites in the life of Gautama Buddha. Ashoka regarded Buddhism as a doctrine that could serve as a cultural foundation for political unity. Ashoka is now remembered as a philanthropic administrator. In the Kalinga edicts, he addresses his people as his children, and mentions that as a father he desires their good. Ashoka's name, Aśoka, means painless, without sorrow, in Sanskrit. In his edicts, he is referred to as Divanam Priya and Priyadasan. His fondness for his name's connection to the Sarasarasaka tree, or the Ashoka tree, is also referenced in the Ashoka H.G. Wells wrote of Ashoka in his book The Outline of History. Amidst the tens of thousands of names of monarchs that crowd the columns of history, their majesties and graciousnesses and serenities and royal highnesses and the like, the name of Ashoka shines, and shines, almost alone. A star, along with the edicts of Ashoka. His legend is related in the 2nd century CE Ashokavardhana, and in the Sri Lankan text Mahavamsa. The emblem of the modern Republic of India is an adaptation of the lion capital of Ashoka. Biography. Ashoka's early life. Ashoka was born to the Mauryan Emperor Bindusara and a relatively lower-ranked wife of his, Dharma. He was the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, founder of Mauryan Dynasty. The Avardhana texts mention that his mother was Queen Subhadrangi. According to Ashokavardhana, she was the daughter of a Brahmin from the city of Kampa. Though a palace intrigue kept her away from the emperor, this eventually ended, and she bore a son. It is from her exclamation, "I am now without sorrow," that Ashoka got his name. The Divyavardhana tells a similar story, but gives the name of the queen as Janapadakalyani. Ashoka had several elder siblings, all of whom were his half-brothers from other wives of Bindusara. His fighting qualities were apparent from an early age, and he was given royal military training. He was known as a fearsome hunter, and according to a legend, killed a lion with just a wooden rod. Because of his reputation as a frightening warrior and a heartless general, he was sent to curb the riots in the Avanti province of the Mauryan Empire. Rise to power. The Buddhist text Divyavardhana describes Ashoka putting down a revolt due to activities of wicked ministers. This may have been an incident in Bindusara's times. Taranatha's account states that Acharya Chanakya, Bindusara's chief advisor, destroyed the nobles and kings of 16 towns and made himself the master of all territory between the eastern and the western seas. Some historians consider this as an indication of Bindusara's conquest of the Deccan, while others consider it as suppression of a revolt. Following this, Ashoka was stationed at Ujjaini as governor. Bindusara's death in 272 BCE led to a war over succession. According to the Divyavardhana, Bindusara wanted his son Susima to succeed him, but Ashoka was supported by his father's ministers. who found Susima to be arrogant and disrespectful towards them. A minister named Radhagupta seems to have played an important role in Ashoka's rise to the throne. The Ashoka Vardhana recounts Radhagupta's offering of an old royal elephant to Ashoka for him to ride to the garden of the gold pavilion where King Bindusara would determine his successor. Ashoka later got rid of the legitimate heir to the throne by tricking him into entering a pit filled with live coals. Radhagupta, according to the Ashoka Vardhana, would later be appointed prime minister by Ashoka once he had gained the throne. The Dipavansa and Mahavansa refer to Ashoka's killing 99 of his brothers, sparing only one, named Vitashoka or Tissa, although there is no clear proof about this incident. The coronation happened in 269 BCE, 4 years after his succession to the throne. Early life as emperor. Buddhist legends state that Ashoka was bad-tempered and of a wicked nature. He built Ashoka's hell, an elaborate torture chamber described as a paradisal hell, due to the contrast between its beautiful exterior and the acts carried out within by his appointed executioner, Girikar. This earned him the name of Chandra Ashoka, meaning Ashoka the Fierce in Sanskrit. Professor Charles Dreckmeyer cautions that the Buddhist legends tend to dramatize the change that Buddhism brought in him, and therefore exaggerate Ashoka's past wickedness and his piousness after the conversion. Ascending the throne, Ashoka expanded his empire over the next 8 years. From the present-day boundaries Assam in the east to Balochistan in the west, from the Pamir Knot in Afghanistan in the north to the peninsula of southern India except for present-day Tamil Nadu and Kerala, which were ruled by the 3 ancient Tamil kingdoms. Conquest of Kalinga. While the early part of Ashoka's reign was apparently quite bloodthirsty, he became a follower of the Buddha's teachings after his conquest of Kalinga on the east coast of India in the present-day states of Odisha and north coastal Andhra Pradesh. Kalinga was a state that prided itself on its sovereignty and democracy. With its monarchical parliamentary democracy, it was quite an exception in ancient Bharata, where there existed the concept of Rajdharma. Rajdharma means the duty of the rulers, which was intrinsically entwined with the concept of bravery and dharma. The Kalinga War happened 8 years after his coronation. From his 13th inscription, we come to know that the battle was a massive one and caused the deaths of more than 100,000 soldiers and many civilians who rose up in defense. Over 150,000 were deported. When he was walking through the grounds of Kalinga after his conquest, rejoicing in his victory, he was moved by the number of bodies strewn there and the wails of the kith and kin of the dead. Buddhist Conversion Edict 13 on the Edicts of Ashoka rock inscriptions reflect the great remorse the king felt after observing the destruction of Kalinga. His Majesty feels remorse on account of the conquest of Kalinga because, during the subjugation of a previously unconquered country, slaughter, death, and taking away captive of the people necessarily occur, whereat His Majesty feels profound sorrow and regret. The edict goes on to address the even greater degree of sorrow and regret resulting from Ashoka's understanding that the friends and families of deceased would suffer greatly too. Legend says that one day after the war was over, Ashoka ventured out to roam the city and all he could see were burnt houses and scattered corpses. This sight made him sick and he cried the famous monologue, "What have I done? If this is a victory, what's for defeat then? Is this a victory or a defeat? Is this justice or injustice? Is it gallantry or a rout? Is it valor to kill innocent children and women? Did I do it to widen the empire and for prosperity or to destroy the other's kingdom and splendor? One has lost her husband, someone else a father, someone a child, someone an unborn infant. What's this debris of the corpses? Are these marks of victory or defeat? Are these vultures, crows, eagles the messengers of death or evil?" The lethal war with Kalinga transformed the vengeful Emperor Ashoka to a stable and peaceful emperor, and he became a patron of Buddhism. Whether or not he converted to Buddhism is unclear, although Buddhist tradition mentions so. According to the prominent Indologist Basham, Ashoka's personal religion became Buddhism, if not before, then certainly after the Kalinga War. However, according to Basham, the Dharma officially propagated by Ashoka was not Buddhism at all. Romila Thapa notes that modern-day historians question his conversion into Buddhism in the aftermath of the Kalinga War. She argues that Ashoka curiously refrained from engraving his confession anywhere. Nevertheless, his patronage led to the expansion of Buddhism in the Mauryan Empire and other kingdoms during his rule, and worldwide from about 250 BCE. Prominent in this cause were his son Mahinda and daughter Sanghamitra, who established Buddhism in Ceylon. Archaeological evidence for Buddhism between the death of the Buddha and the time of Ashoka is scarce. After the time of Ashoka it is abundant. Death and legacy. Ashoka ruled for an estimated 40 years. Legend states that during his cremation, his body burned for 7 days and nights. After his death, the Mauryan dynasty lasted just 50 more years until his empire stretched over almost all of the Indian subcontinent. Ashoka had many wives and children, but many of their names are lost to time. His chief consort for the majority of his reign was his wife, Sanghamitra, who apparently bore him no children. In his old age, he seems to have come under the spell of his youngest wife Tishyariksha. It is said that she had got Ashoka's son Kanala, the regent in Takshashila and the heir presumptive to the throne, blinded by a wily stratagem. The official executioners spared Kanala and he became a wandering singer accompanied by his favorite wife Kanchanmala. In Pataliputra, Ashoka heard Kanala's song, and realized that Kanala's misfortune may have been a punishment for some past sin of the emperor himself. He condemned Tishyariksha to death, restoring Kanala to the court. In the Ashoka Vardhana, Kanala is portrayed as forgiving Tishyariksha, having obtained enlightenment through Buddhist practice. While he urges Ashoka to forgive her as well, Ashoka does not respond with the same forgiveness. Kanala was succeeded by his son, Samprati, who ruled for 50 years until his death. The reign of Ashoka Maurya might have disappeared into history as the ages passed by, had he not left behind records of his reign. These records are in the form of sculpted pillars and rocks inscribed with a variety of actions and teachings he wished to be published under his name. The language used for inscription was in one of the Prakrit common languages etched in a Brahma script. In the year 185 BCE, about 50 years after Ashoka's death, the last Maurya ruler, Brihadratha, was assassinated by the commander-in-chief of the Mauryan armed forces, Pushyamitra Shunga, while he was taking the guard of honor of his forces. Pushyamitra Shunga founded the Shunga dynasty and ruled just a fragmented part of the Mauryan Empire. Many of the northwestern territories of the Mauryan Empire became the Indo-Greek kingdom. King Ashoka, the third monarch of the Indian Mauryan dynasty, is also considered as one of the most exemplary rulers who ever lived. Buddhist kingship. One of the more enduring legacies of Ashoka Maurya was the model that he provided for the relationship between Buddhism and the state. Throughout Theravada Southeastern Asia, the model of rulership embodied by Ashoka replaced the notion of divine kingship that had previously dominated. Under this model of Buddhist kingship, the king sought to legitimize his rule not through descent from a divine source, but by supporting and earning the approval of the Buddhist Sangha. Many rulers also took an active role in resolving disputes over the status and regulation of the Sangha, as Ashoka had in calling a conclave to settle a number of contentious issues during his reign. This development ultimately led to a close association in many Southeast Asian countries between the monarchy and the religious hierarchy, an association that can still be seen today in the state-supported Buddhism of Thailand and the traditional role of the Thai king as both a religious and secular leader. Ashoka also said that all his courtiers always governed the people in a moral manner. According to the legends mentioned in the 2nd century CE text Ashoka Vardhana, Ashoka was not non-violent after adopting Buddhism. In one instance, a non-Buddhist in Pandravardhana drew a picture showing the Buddha bowing at the feet of Nigrantha Jainatiputra. On complaint from a Buddhist devotee, Ashoka issued an order to arrest him, and subsequently, another order to kill all the Ajivikas in Pandravardhana. Around 18,000 followers of the Ajivika sect were executed as a result of this order. Sometime later, another Nigrantha follower in Pataliputra drew a similar picture. Ashoka burnt him and his entire family alive in their house. He also announced an award of 1 dinara to anyone who brought him the head of a Nigrantha heretic. According to Ashoka Vardhana, as a result of this order, his own brother was mistaken for a heretic and killed by a cowherd. These stories of persecutions of rival sects by Ashoka appear to be a clear fabrication arising out of sectarian propaganda. Perceptions. The use of Buddhist sources in reconstructing the life of Ashoka has had a strong influence on perceptions of Ashoka, as well as the interpretations of his edicts. Building on traditional accounts, early scholars regarded Ashoka as a primarily Buddhist monarch who underwent a conversion to Buddhism and was actively engaged in sponsoring and supporting the Buddhist monastic institution. Some scholars have tended to question this assessment. The only source of information not attributable to Buddhist sources are the Ashokan edicts, and these do not explicitly state that Ashoka was a Buddhist. In his edicts, Ashoka expresses support for all the major religions of his time: Buddhism, Brahmanism, Jainism, and Ajivikaism, and his edicts addressed to the population at large generally focus on moral themes members of all the religions would accept. However, there is strong evidence in the edicts alone that he was a Buddhist. In one edict he belittles rituals, and he banned Vedic animal sacrifices. These strongly suggest that he at least did not look to the Vedic tradition for guidance. Furthermore, there are many edicts expressed to Buddhists alone. In one, Ashoka declares himself to be an upasaka, and in another he demonstrates a close familiarity with Buddhist texts. He erected rock pillars at Buddhist holy sites, but did not do so for the sites of other religions. He also used the word Dhamma to refer to qualities of the heart that underlie moral action. This was an exclusively Buddhist use of the word. Finally, the ideals he promotes correspond to the first 3 steps of the Buddha's graduated discourse. Interestingly, the Ashoka Vardhana presents an alternate view of the familiar Ashoka, one in which his conversion does not have anything to do with the Kalinga War or about his descent from the Maurya Dynasty. Instead, Ashoka's reason for adopting non-violence appears much more personal. The Ashoka Vardhana shows that the main source of Ashoka's conversion and the acts of welfare that followed are rooted instead in intense personal anguish at its core, from a wellspring inside himself. It thereby illuminates Ashoka as more humanly ambitious and passionate, with both greatness and flaws. This Ashoka is very different from the shadowy Dugada of later Pali chronicles. Much of the knowledge about Ashoka comes from the several inscriptions that he had carved on pillars and rocks throughout the empire. All his inscriptions present him as compassionate and loving. In the Kalinga rock edicts, he addresses his people as his children, and mentions that as a father he desires their good. These inscriptions promoted Buddhist morality and encouraged non-violence and adherence to Dharma, and they talk of his fame and conquered lands as well as the neighboring kingdoms holding up his might. One also gets some primary information about the Kalinga War and Ashoka's allies, plus some useful knowledge on the civil administration. The Ashoka pillar at Sarnath is the most notable of the relics left by Ashoka. Made of sandstone, this pillar records the visit of the emperor to Sarnath in the 3rd century BCE. It has a 4-lion capital which was adopted as the emblem of the modern Indian Republic. The lion symbolizes both Ashoka's imperial rule and the kingship of the Buddha. In translating these monuments, historians learn the bulk of what is assumed to have been true fact of the Mauryan Empire. It is difficult to determine whether or not some actual events ever happened. but the stone etchings clearly depict how Ashoka wanted to be thought of and remembered. Focus of debate. Recently, scholarly analysis determined that the three major foci of debate regarding Ashoka involved the nature of the Maurya Empire, the extent and impact of Ashoka's pacifism, and what is referred to in the inscriptions as Dhamma or Dharma, which connotes goodness, virtue, and charity. Some historians have argued that Ashoka's pacifism undermined the military backbone of the Maurya Empire, while others have suggested that the extent and impact of his pacifism have been grossly exaggerated. The Dhamma of the edicts has been understood as concurrently a Buddhist lay ethic, a set of politico-moral ideas, a sort of universal religion, or as an Ashokan innovation. On the other hand, it has also been interpreted as an essentially political ideology that sought to knit together a vast and diverse empire. Scholars are still attempting to analyze both the expressed and implied political ideas of the edicts, and make inferences pertaining to how that vision was grappling with problems and political realities of a virtually subcontinental, and culturally and economically highly variegated, 3rd century BCE Indian empire. Nonetheless, it remains clear that Ashoka's inscriptions represent the earliest corpus of royal inscriptions in the Indian subcontinent, and therefore prove to be a very important innovation in royal practices.